The studio lights of loose women shimmered brightly across the polished floor, casting long reflections that made everything look a bit larger, a bit louder, and a bit more dramatic than it really was. The audience murmured with excitement. Today's guest was none other than Rod Stewart, the rock legend whose gravelly voice and flamboyant charm had colored several decades of music history. Backstage, Rod adjusted the cuffs of his tailored gold blazer, stealing a quick look in the mirror. Still got it, he thought with a grin. Even at 70-something, he walked with the swagger of a man who had performed on stages filled with screaming fans and navigated more interviews than he cared to remember. A producer approached, headset crookedly perched on one ear. "Mr. Stewart, you're on in 20 seconds. Denise is leading the segment." Rod gave a playful wink. "Ah, Denise. I adore her, when she behaves." The producer laughed nervously, unsure whether the comment was a joke. With Denise Welch, it was always unpredictable. She wasn't afraid to press uncomfortable questions, challenge guests, or toss in a dramatic pause that set social media ablaze. It was good television, but not always pleasant for the guest. The stage manager signaled. Rod strutted out, greeted by applause. He waved broadly, blowing a theatrical kiss to the crowd. The panel, Denise Welch, Jane Moore, Charlene White, and Kay Adams, sat behind the long wooden desk, smiling as he approached. "Rod Stewart," Denise exclaimed dramatically. "The one and only." Rod bowed. "Lovely to see you, darling." They exchanged cheeky smiles, but from the very first minute, something in the air felt charged. Charlene began with easy questions about Rod's new music, his upcoming charity concert, and a playful comment about his iconic hair. Rod answered smoothly, sprinkling jokes throughout. But then Denise leaned forward, her eyes sharpening with that familiar interview predator glint. "Rod," she said, tapping her pen against the desk, "you've been quite outspoken recently about young artists and how they don't respect the craft anymore. Some say you sounded a bit bitter. Do you stand by those comments?" The room stiffened. Rod chuckled lightly, trying to keep things friendly. "Oh, Denise, you always stir the pot. I wasn't bitter, just pointing out that some musicians rely more on social media than real talent these days." Denise raised an eyebrow. "But isn't that a bit ironic? You had a whole image phase yourself. Blonde hair, flashy suits, you used your looks as much as your voice." Rod laughed again, but there was a slight edge to it. "I used everything I had, love. That's called being an entertainer." The audience laughed, sensing the playful tension. But Denise wasn't done. "So you're saying young artists don't entertain?" she pressed. Rod took a breath. "I'm saying some don't work as hard. Many expect fame overnight." Jane Moore jumped in to soften the moment, but Denise spoke over her. "Some viewers think comments like that make you sound like you're stuck in the past." Rod leaned back, his smile fading. "Denise, I've been in this industry for 50 years. I've earned the right to speak my mind." The audience clapped, but Denise remained unfazed. "Of course you have," she replied, voice cool. "But when legends criticize newcomers, it can feel like gatekeeping. Do you feel threatened by the new generation?" Rod blinked, stunned. "Threatened? Darling, I don't get threatened. I mentor young artists. I support talent wherever I see it." Denise's tone sharpened further. "But you just said many of them don't have talent." Rod suddenly sat forward. "No, you said that. I said some rely too much on social media. There's a huge difference." A rumble moved through the audience. Behind the panel, a producer made a chopping motion, urging the segment to calm before it spiraled. But Denise, sensing drama and ratings, pressed harder. "So then name one young artist you think actually works hard," she said, folding her arms. Rod frowned. "Why would I start listing names on live TV? That's ridiculous." "Because you made a claim," Denise shot back. "And claims need backing." Rod's jaw tightened. "I'm not here to be interrogated." Denise smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Then maybe you shouldn't make sweeping statements." Rod interrupted, voice raised slightly. "And maybe you shouldn't twist my words." The audience gasped audibly. Charlene and Kay both reached out instinctively, trying to defuse the situation. All right, let's take a breath," Kay said with a practiced calm. "We don't want World War III on daytime TV." But the tension was now unmistakable. Rod shook his head, visibly annoyed. "I came here to talk about music and charity," he said. "Not to be ambushed." Denise folded her notes. "It wasn't an ambush, Rod. It was a conversation. Felt like a trap to me, he muttered. The producer frantically signaled the floor manager. A commercial break was desperately needed. Okay, we're heading to a quick break, Charlene announced cheerfully, though her eyes screamed panic. Stay with us. As soon as the red light went off, Rod stood up abruptly, ripping off his mic. I'm not doing this, he said sharply. Rod, just give us a moment, Jane tried. But he was already walking toward the backstage exit. Denise watched him go, her expression unreadable. The floor manager whispered urgently to the director. He's leaving, for real. The director whispered back, horrified. He can't leave. Not like this. But Rod Stewart was already out of sight. Backstage, chaos erupted the moment Rod Stewart disappeared behind the heavy black curtain. Crew members sprinted after him, calling out his name as he stormed down the hallway, still fuming. Rod's manager, Colin, hurried alongside him. Rod, mate, slow down. Let's talk about this. Rod whirled around. Talk. Did you see what she did? I came here for a positive interview, and she turned it into a courtroom. Colin lifted his palms. I know. But walking out mid-show was better than sitting there being poked like a zoo animal, Rod snapped. Meanwhile, inside the studio, Denise Welch sat rigidly in her chair as the other panelists exchanged worried glances. Jane Moore leaned close, whispering, Denise, why did you keep pushing? You know how he gets. Denise exhaled sharply. I wasn't pushing. I was doing my job. He made bold claims. I asked reasonable questions. Reasonable. Charlene raised her brows. It felt a bit like a cross-examination. Denise folded her arms. I didn't twist anything. He just didn't like being challenged. But even she looked slightly shaken. The producer rushed onto the stage. Ladies, he left the set. We need a plan. We're back from commercial in 40 seconds. Kay Adams stood up immediately. All Phil. Just keep the energy calm. The red light blinked back on. Kay began, welcome back to Loose Women. In case you're just joining us, we've had quite an energetic discussion with Rod Stewart, and he's stepped away for a moment. The audience laughed nervously, unsure what to make of the situation. Backstage, two senior producers cornered Rod and Colin near the exit. Rod, please, one of them pleaded. We need you back on set, even just for 30 seconds to wrap things properly. Rod shook his head. I'm not walking back into that lion's den. Another producer chimed in, we can bring you back after Denise's segment. You won't have to talk to her again. Rod hesitated. Colin jumped. At the opening. Rod, finish it professionally. Say your piece. Then we leave. Rod ran a hand through his famous hair. Fine, but I'm not sitting at that table again. The producers nodded rapidly. We'll set you up at the side stage. No panel, no questions. Inside the studio, Kay had stretched the conversation as long as she could, but tension still buzzed. The audience kept glancing toward the wings, hoping for a reappearance. Finally, a crew member signaled, he's ready. Kay straightened. Ladies and gentlemen, Rod Stewart has agreed to say a few final words. A polite applause rose as Rod stepped out, but instead of heading toward the panel desk, he stopped at a separate standing microphone, away from Denise. His posture was stiff. His expression controlled, but only barely. Thank you, he began. I'd like to clarify something before I go. I have the utmost respect for young artists. I never said they lack talent. I only meant that times have changed, and so have the paths to success. He glanced toward the panel. The other women nodded supportively. Denise, however, simply watched him, arms crossed. Rod continued, I came here with good intentions. I'm passionate about music, about charity, about lifting people up, not tearing them down. And I won't let a misunderstanding overshadow that. A ripple of supportive applause filled the room. Denise finally spoke, leaning toward her mic. Rod, if my questions came off harsh, that wasn't the intention. We challenge our guests, but we also appreciate them. The audience turned to see his response. Rod looked directly at her, eyes steady. Then challenge with fairness, Denise. Not with traps. The studio fell silent. Denise blinked, slightly stung, but before she could reply, Rod nodded to the crowd. Thank you for having me. Truly. But I think this is where I say goodbye. As he stepped back, the director cut to wide shot, but unexpectedly, security staff approached Rod from the side stage. One whispered something in his ear. Rod's brows rose in disbelief. Colin's eyes widened. What now? The head floor manager stepped forward with an apologetic expression. Rod, the executive producer has decided, it's better if you exit immediately. For safety. For control of the broadcast. They don't want the situation to escalate. Rod stared. Are you saying I'm being removed? It's protocol, the manager said. Especially after a walk-off on live TV. The audience murmured, sensing something dramatic happening off camera. Rod let out a humorless laugh. So I'm being kicked off my own exit. Denise looked shocked. Jane covered her mouth. Charlene whispered, oh, no. Security gently guided Rod toward the backstage doors, not forcefully, but firmly enough that the message was clear, the show wanted him gone. The audience buzzed with confusion. As the doors swung closed behind him, Denise exhaled shakily. Well, that wasn't how I expected this to go. Kay quickly cut in to regain control. Live television, folks. Never boring. But even she looked rattled. Outside, Rod stood at the curb beside his waiting car, the cold London air brushing against his gold blazer. Colin opened the door for him. Rod paused. I've performed for millions. Survived critics. Lived through scandals. But being kicked off Loose Women. He shook his head. That's a new one. Colin sighed. Social media is going to explode. Rod slid into the car with a tired smile. Good. Let it. The car pulled away, leaving the studio lights fading behind him, yet the story was only beginning to spread. And by evening, it would be everywhere. The headlines. The clips. The speculation. Rod Stewart versus Denise Welch. A clash no one would forget anytime soon.